Afternoon, everyone. It is Tuesday afternoon at 3 p.m. ET, and you lucky readers have found us at Crime Time on A Mighty Blaze. Yes, it is 3 p.m. ET. It is a special time for Crime Time because we have such a wonderful author today, and we did not want to let her get away without you meeting her. I am your host of Crime Time, Hank Phillippi Ryan, the USA Today bestselling author of 14 novels of suspense. My brand new one, The House Guest, which you are among the first. I can't ever figure out which way it is. You are the first to see the cover on the door of The House Guest, which comes out on Tuesday, February 7th. It's sort of Gaslight meets Thelma and Louise meets Strangers on a Train. So if you can sort of put that together and figure out what that might be, you might be right and you might be wrong. But today we have the absolute joy of welcoming Kat Rosenfield, whose new book is just out from William Morrow, January 10th, called You Must Remember This. And I am still singing, You Must Remember This. And I don't know how you keep people from singing this throughout, but it's such a perfect title. And Kat Rosenfield is the double Edgar nominated author for a couple other books, and we'll tell you more about that in a minute. But let me tell you what Publishers Weekly said about You Must Remember This. Hi, Diane. Hi, Pamela. Fry Priest is here. Susie Baldwin is here. Lynn Hanman is here. So Leslie is here from Los Angeles. So nice to see you all. And we'll be saying hi throughout. Leave a question, leave a comment, because we will be giving away a copy. Well, we won't, but Kat, you're not taking this copy. This is my book. But Kat Rosenfield and William Morrow will be giving away a copy of You Must Remember This to some lucky commenter. So leave a question. Do leave a question for Kat, and we'll get to those at the end of the show. Leave a comment. Just say general adulation. I cannot wait to read You Must Remember This, or I will remember to read You Must Remember This. Kat's heard all the remembering jokes, I'm sure. So Publishers Weekly called You Must Remember This clever and surprising. And that is certainly true. It says, the superb character-driven plot delivers an astonishing, believable jolt. We won't talk about that specifically because no spoilers. I want you to have the joy of reading this book just as I did. Rosenfield shines a searing light on issues of classism, jealousy, and squandered potential. And there's also memory and setting and family, and it's a wonderful book. It's a wonderful book. Kat Rosenfield's You Must Remember This. Kat, welcome. And what did you think about that marvelous review?
Oh, I mean, pinch me. It was a wonderful review.
I mean, do you get it from your editor? Did she say Publishers Weekly review and you clicked and you had that moment of waiting to see what it would be?
Yes, so I think it was my publicist who sends, she always sends through the reviews. And I believe that she would probably, she would prepare me if it was bad, but she also prepares you if it's good. She's like, this is a good review, so that you can click, okay, don't have to gird my loins to be devastated. So yeah, that was wonderful.
There's a sort of shorthand you all that editors and publicists sometimes do. Mine does, at least. If there's a good review, it'll say like, your Publishers Weekly review, ! Meaning it's okay, you can open this. But and this has never happened, but if they would write, you might want to sit down, just don't tell me that. So it is very difficult to get such a wonderful Publishers Weekly review as Kat Rosenfield did for You Must Remember This. And it is really on the money. Welcome to you all. I see so many more people coming. Pamela Fry Priest says, a jolt. Ooh, and yes, it is. Darlene says, welcome to Kat. So looking forward to this interview. That is wonderful. Welcome to you all, and we're so glad that you are here. If you are new to A Mighty Blaze, this is a perfect day to join us. We have a marvelous author. A Mighty Blaze was started at the beginning of the pandemic, almost 3 years ago now, which is so crazy, by the marvelous powerhouse team of Jenna Blum and Caroline Levitt, to keep us all together and keep us reading and keep us finding new authors and keeping up with our favorite authors and maybe making a new favorite author. And that is why we were talking to Kat Rosenfield today. Let me tell you Kat Rosenfield's official bio. So if you don't know her, you will in a minute, a little bit better. Kat Rosenfield is a freelance pop culture and political writer, the author of 5 books, including the Edgar-nominated No One Will Miss Her. awesome book. And the Edgar-nominated YA Amelia Ann is Dead and Gone. A former reporter for MTV News, which I cannot wait to talk about, her work has appeared in outlets including Vulture, Entertainment Weekly, Playboy, Reason, The New York Times, and Unheard. Welcome, welcome, welcome to you, Kat. I want to talk to you about setting and secrets and family history and memory and all those themes, and definitely how you created this story. My notes, you can see them in the back of the book. I wrote in the book. It says, can you read this at all? No. It says, subtle and elegant is how this book felt to me. Sometimes I was thinking of this book as, a mystery is puzzle pieces all put together. And the reader is putting the puzzle pieces together to make a picture that we don't know what is. And in this book, you put together the picture and then you think, look at the back of the puzzle and see what this really is. And that's how I felt reading your book. I thought I knew what was going on, but I did not. So I will stop talking in a second. You have characters in a setting, not only a beautiful house, but sort of the locked room, not only the locked room mystery of a house, but the locked room of memory. And I love how you played with that. Tell us about the setting first. Where does this take place and how did you figure that out?
So this book is set at Christmas time on the coast of Maine. I'm trying to do a thing where all my books are set in Maine, just kind of creeping on Stephen King's territory there a little bit. And this is at a ramshackle, kind of crumbling estate called the Whispers. It's on Mount Desert Island in Bar Harbor, which used to be a real playground for the rich and famous back before the island and also most of the state of Maine was consumed by this huge forest fire in 1947. So prior to that, Mount Desert Island and Bar Harbor specifically was a place where people with a lot of money from New York City would go for the summer to stay in what they called cottages. They were not cottages, they were huge mansions. So I love a Gothic novel. I love a Gothic setting where you have a house that is sort of a character unto itself. And as I was telling you before we hopped on, one of the things that I did during the pandemic was became an avid recreational Zillower. I spent a lot of time on Zillow looking at houses that I could not afford and would never buy. And this was a way to kind of channel that maybe into something a little bit less lustful and a little more productive.
Oh, that's lovely. But is the Whispers, which, the very name is so evocative because that's what people whispering to each other, the whispers of memory and the sound of the wind in the trees, all of that goes into the Whispers. Is that from a real house or is it an imaginary house, or how would you describe where it came from?
It's an imaginary house. I used a lot of different houses kind of mashed together because I wanted things from each one of them. I wanted a house that had this specific kind of architecture inside, but I wanted it to look a certain way and be situated above the bay on a cliff in a certain way. I wanted it to have a certain type of garden setting behind it. And of course, the hidden staircases, hidden passages. I created an entire bootlegging operation to accompany this fake house that doesn't exist. But the house that it's probably closest to is the one that belonged to what's his name, Joseph Pulitzer. And I don't think that it's standing anymore. I think a lot of these houses, all of the ones on what they called Millionaires Row at the time, virtually all of them were destroyed by this fire. So I had to rely on, old postcards and sometimes letters from people who had stayed in the houses. This was a time when people would come and, do these extended stays with friends and family. You might go and be with your friends for like 2 months or 3 months in their home. So that was how I sort of constructed, the feel of the place, and then introduced architecture from a bunch of different houses that I had pictures of.
I'm thinking about the nooks and crannies of the Whispers. It's so cinematic, and anyone who reads You Must Remember This will absolutely be able to envision this house, almost find their way through it as much as they can. I know I really could. The nooks and crannies of the house, though, play a great role in this novel. To the Whispers you bring, Susie Baldwin says, the house you created sounds great, Kat. And of course, somebody's calling me. And Renee says, ooh, I love hidden passages and hidden staircase. And Renee is also asking, did you spend time in Maine while writing this book? Could you actually go there?
Yeah, I spent a lot of time in Maine growing up. Both of my grandparents, both sets of grandparents, had homes in Maine, and my father's parents lived there during the end of their lives, the later years of their lives. They lived in Deer Isle, which is adjacent to Bar Harbor. It's a smaller island, not quite the same history of wealth and intrigue there. But I obviously, I visited them quite a lot. I'm very familiar with the landscape. And I love also the sort of the social fabric of Maine. It's a very special and very unique place where if you're not from there, if you're not from in the state, they refer to you as from away.
From away. As well, I know, and that is such a part of your book. You must remember this, the class division, and how you are not allowed to cross a line. And if you do, you'll be snubbed by both sides. It is, and one of the main characters who I adore is this risk-taking young woman named Miriam, who defies this class system. And it's about what happens to her. So, to the Whispers, and I know Jenna Blum is saying, also obsessed with the title of this book. And yes, we will talk about that in a minute. Absolutely. Dara Brooks Rita says, intrigued, looking forward to reading. And Pamela Fry-Priest says, I love Maine and your setting. I love mansions. This sounds so good. And it is so cinematic. You will be able to envision this. So to the Whispers, you bring this family. Talk a little bit about why and who they are.
Yeah, so we have a fractured family. They have gathered for their first Christmas together in a very long time. What they also imagine will be Miriam's last Christmas. Miriam, in the contemporary timeline in this book, there are two. We meet her as a young woman and then again as an older woman. She, in the present day, is 85 years old. She has dementia. She's slipping away. There's an expectation that by next Christmas she will not be around anymore, or if she is still alive, her mind will be so fractured that there won't be anything left really, nobody left to cultivate a relationship with. And it's very important to cultivate a relationship with her in this moment, because when Miriam dies, she's going to leave behind an estate worth about $20 million. So all of her children have gathered here, there are three of them, to maybe get a last little chance at kind of getting in good with their mother, saying goodbye and ensuring that their inheritance is all shored up. So on Christmas Eve, when Miriam steps out of the house, walks out onto the frozen reach, falls through the ice and dies, it's a terrible accident, or is it because everybody had a motive?
And it's such a classic plot. And yet you create this very new, very modern, very unusual, it's complex but not complicated structure of the book. You were referring to the past and the present timeline. And talk a little bit about why you decided to present Miriam as a young woman and then as this declining woman who has people's futures in their hands.
So I did not know when I first started writing this book that we were going to meet her as a younger woman. I wasn't really sure. I've never written historical fiction before. I wasn't sure that I was up to that challenge. And the image that I began with was of an old woman falling through the ice and disappearing, beneath it. So it wasn't until I started writing the book that I realized that Miriam's history was really one that existed in conversation with her granddaughter's life in the present. These two women each have a story. Each of their stories is both unique, but also in conversation and in parallel in certain ways to the other. There are echoes back and forth of choices that will haunt each of them. And for Miriam, that have haunted her all her life.
Well, they each want to be happy, and they each search for happiness in a way, and they each make decisions along the way. Miriam and Delphine each make decisions along the way about what they will do, and often some of them have to do with the choice of partner, of spouse, of loved one, of lover. Talk a little bit about why that's important, the bravery and the courage and the love and the older fashioned versus modern search for that.
Hmm. So Miriam's love story at face value is like something out of a movie. It's a beautiful romance. And when I originally pitched this book, I described it as Knives Out meets The Notebook on the coast of Maine. And The Notebook, obviously, has that old, passionate romance that takes place in an earlier time when, it seemed like, I don't know, people were maybe a little bit more likely to take a leap like that, to take this big risk for the sake of love, in a way that we're cautious now. We worry about it. We background check our Tinder dates. So I wanted to create this story. That does seem very romantic, and it's the kind of thing, if you were Miriam's granddaughter, that you might be very captivated by. You might even think that it's aspirational.
Uh-huh.
But in thinking that, you might be missing something. There's a lot you don't know about what happened between two people who you never knew when they were young, whose relationship ended tragically before you were ever born.
I can't begin to tell you how much what Kat is saying is so evocative of this marvelous book. It's such a terrific story. You must remember this is such a wonderful title because this book is so much about memory and perception, what we choose to believe, as you were talking about, what someone might think of as an aspirational relationship when who knows. What is remembered and how it is remembered, and what we want someone else to think is true. How much fun was that to write about?
Oh, it was great. One of the actual sources of inspiration for Miriam and for her story was my own grandmother, who passed away early on in the pandemic, and she had dementia, which was, unfortunate, but it also was an interesting kind of a challenge, or an interesting opportunity, because she did not really remember much of anything that had happened within the past 30 years. And so to have a relationship with her, every time I visited with her, she wouldn't really know who I was. She would certainly not remember that I had been there. So the only thing that we could do, I had to meet her where she was. And for my grandmother, where she was often more like when she was. She had vivid, vivid memories of her youth, that she would really inhabit moment to moment, as though they were much more recent. And one of my favorite stories that she told me repeatedly was, and I guess it would have been probably 1932, when she was a teenager. She applied to be a coat check girl at the Roseland Ballroom in Chicago. And she was turned down for this job because she wasn't pretty enough. They told her this right to her face. It was a very different time. And she was so salty about this, as if it had happened like last month. And she would tell me these stories, and I would feel as though I were spending time with her younger self, catching glimpses of the woman that she had been. And that was remarkable. And to have an opportunity to kind of explore that in the context of a fictional world was really also wonderful.
It's also wonderful for the reader too, because we see Miriam in a completely different way when we see what she did as a young woman, and we see how what her heart was and what her brain was, and how she took agency with her life, or thought she was at least. And then when you take this family, this fractured family that comes to the Whispers at Christmas for what they think is their last Christmas, which is true, then money starts creeping into the picture. How does money then affect this family? You were talking about this massive inheritance, and then something happens, and it's not a spoiler because it's on the back of the book.
Yes, it's the we call it the $20 million elephant in the room. As is often the case when the wealthy matriarch passes away, what is expected to be in her will is not the same thing that is in her will, and that's very complicated because as Delphine, her granddaughter, has come to harbor certain suspicions about her family members and whether they might have had something to do with Miriam's death, it turns out that Miriam actually left almost everything to her. And so she comes in for suspicion.
Which is wonderful, because one of the things that's so much fun about reading this story is that you begin to understand what each person's motive for dealing with Delphine is, and what they tell her, and how they try to convince her. And it's this core family, but then around the family are other people who enter the family's life, and they are pivotal as well. As who was your favorite of those characters to write?
Of all of the characters in the
All
book.
of the outside characters. So we have the family, and so then you have people who live in the town. You have people who come in to help in the house. So many fantastic characters that push over the dominoes in this story.
So one of my favorite characters was certainly Shelley Dyer, who you also meet in two separate timelines. As an older woman, she has suffered a stroke, and so she can no longer communicate. Her face is paralyzed, and so you really have to extend your imagination to kind of join her in the past, when she was not just a much younger woman, but a very different type of person playing a very different type of role with respect to this family.
Can you envision them all? Do you see them all up in the whispers? And when you're writing, are you sort of watching a movie in your mind of how this unfolds? How do you create that on the page?
I do think about it very cinematically when I'm writing. It unfolds in a visual way for me, and then oftentimes I will have to, have to go back and make sure that I've articulated what I'm seeing well enough that it actually comes to life on the page. But yeah, I have so enjoyed in so many places in this book moments where I was writing a scene with characters, and it was almost as though I myself was watching the scene unfold, not creating it, but just sort of allowing it to pass through me.
I understand that. And the scenes in You Must Remember This are very realistic. They're poignant, they're touching, they're sometimes shocking and surprising. The house itself is incredible with all of its secrets. Why did you decide to name it You Must Remember This? It's a phrase that we all know. It's incredibly evocative. Why did you pick that, and why does it resonate with you?
So it wasn't the original title. I'm actually terrible at titles, and what happens inevitably is I'll have a working title for whatever it is that I'm working on, and we'll get up to sort of the final moment, and my editor will email me, and she'll say, "Is this really the title? Like, I'm sure we can do better than this," and it's true. So what happens is I will send back a few different options, and she'll tell me which one she thinks is the most resonant. I do love a sentence as a title. In this case, I obviously wanted something to do with memory. The book was originally titled Into the Gray because I had all these sort of overwrought ideas about the idea of mist and memory interplaying and kind of, losing yourself in the fog.
Gray matter in the brain.
Yes, yes. But that was a little too esoteric for a genre novel. And so I started thinking instead about, sort of more pop cultural touchstones with respect to memory. And when I realized that you have this old song title that just perfectly evokes everything I wanted, it was sort of a no-brainer.
Yes, and I mean, You Must Remember This makes us we know instantly it's a love story, probably an ill-fated in some way love story. And your book is the two timelines, the multi-generational timelines. That song from 1939 can still touch us today. We all still know what it's from, and we all still know what it's about. So just like your book is multi-generational. Uh-oh, somebody's here. The UPS guy is at your door, and I hope everything is okay. So it's sort of just like your book is multi-generational, then the title is multi-generational. And it's also very indicative of what happens because it can be you must remember this, like you have to remember this, or else something bad will happen. Or, in the big picture, you must remember this sort of philosophical thing. Am I making too much out of this? This is what it seems like to me.
I can't say that I thought about it as hard as that, but as you're saying it, I do love these dual resonances. I love the idea that this phrase can mean different things to different people, which is in fact very key to the way events unfold in this book.
Did you know how it was going to end? I think we had a question about that as well. Renee might have asked. Do you know the whole book going in, or was it a surprise to you along the way?
I certainly outline sort of informally, but I do have to know what's going to happen at each stage, sort of scene by scene before I begin writing. Um, in this case, I sort of uncovered Miriam's past and realized that we needed to inhabit that past with her in the form of another perspective
Mhm.
within the narrative as I began to write. But once I realized that that needed to happen, I sat down and I plotted out her timeline and Delphine's timeline and discovered that because they are so in conversation with each other, it was really easy to know where to leave off from one and where to pick up with the other, because there are these little things that bring you back and forth from the past to the
Oh no,
present.
it's very elegantly done. It really is. It's subtle and gorgeous and seamless and so much fun to read. We had a question about that as well, which was, did you write? And I forget who asked it. It goes by so quickly. Did you write one person's timeline and then the other person's, or did you? There, thank you, thank you, Karen in the back. You got it for me. How did you write the dual timeline? Asks Sherry. Did you write one time all at once, or switch between them just as the reader reads?
So I mostly would write up to the place where the timeline switches, and then I would switch.
Mhm.
And in that way, because we jump so much with Miriam, we jump ahead from when she's maybe 12 or 13 to when she's 16 to when she's 17 to when she's 22 to when she's 30. So it was natural to have these big breaks. And so it was, I mostly do write linearly. So, just front to back. However the story is going to unfold. There were things that I wrote where I realized that they needed to come in a different place. It made more sense to break from the one timeline earlier or later, so that you had this other scene kind of, falling in a different place within the narrative.
I was looking when you were talking, looking also at all the places I've marked in this book, that the writing is so beautiful. I mean, story aside and wonderful plot aside and wonderful characters aside, you are so incredibly skilled at writing this sort of perfectly elegant, descriptive, voluptuous, new sounding. I mean, it's your style is something that I've never read before. Have you? I mean, I loved. No one will miss her. Was that the first one? No one will miss her, which again has this sentence title with all the multiple meanings. I loved that. Again, was surprised. This is different from that, though. Equally great, but different from that. Did you consciously write it I mean, equally good, but different, literary and beautiful and reminiscent and, misty?
Yeah, I mean, it's just a different story, and I realized as I was beginning to write it that it was going to be a very different story, and I was worried about that because No One Will Miss Her is very voicey and very pacey and completely different from this. I would say that You Must Remember This is a slower burn. It's also a lot more romantic and a lot sexier, for better or for worse. And so that was mostly about writing in service of what the story needed. These characters are living in a different environment, in Miriam's case, a completely different time from the ones in No One Will Miss Her. And so it was important to make sure that the voice of the narrative felt appropriate to them, felt like it was at home with them.
How did you feel about that as a writer? I mean, that is realization of your own power as a writer, that you don't write not, I mean, clearly you don't write the same book every time, but you're not even writing the same style every time. You were talking about being in service to the story, but as a writer, you can do that. What do you think about that?
Gosh, I hadn't thought too hard about it. I always think in terms of, what links my work together, which is, I think, a strong sense of place. And, from there, it's possible to be flexible and to sort of explore different perspectives. I think that, one of the wonderful things about having made this book so different was getting to inhabit a different mindset, a different world, and a different perspective from the one that I am usually in. No One Will Miss Her is very much, I mean, I wouldn't say that it's literally my voice because people in that book do things that I would not do because they are illegal. But apart from that, the viewpoint, this sort of maybe slightly cynical take on the world that you have through the eyes of Lizzie Willette, that's more in keeping with my own perspective. This was really an exercise in imagining how somebody else would see the world, somebody who'd had completely different experiences from me.
Yes, and it comes through so beautifully. No One Will Miss Her is tough, and she has an attitude, and it's very thriller-esque, and you turn the pages as fast as you possibly can. And in You Must Remember This, it's equally seductively mesmerizing, and the story just evolves into something that no one who was reading it could ever have imagined. I closed this book and I thought, are you kidding me? You just fooled me in every way. Diane says, I'm going to need this book. Yes, indeed.
Yeah, you do.
If you leave a question or a comment, you may win a copy of this book. The rest of you, if you do not win, you go right out and get You Must Remember This. I won't even make a joke about how you must remember to buy it. You Must Remember This. Such a terrific book. And we'll get to our questions in about 1 minute, but let me just ask you, I must ask you about being a reporter for MTV News. How did that happen? And what was that? You must be tired of answering it, but it's so irresistible.
No, it was a great experience. It was something that I fell backwards into because I did not know that I wanted to write when I first kind of stepped out into the world. A lot of writers say, "Oh, I always knew I wanted to do this." I really was basically like the last person to figure out that I should be doing this. I had to find out first that I'm basically not good at anything else. And so after college, I had gotten a job in publishing. I was working as a publicist, and I was a terrible publicist. I want to be very upfront about this. Being a publicist requires that you be a really good liar, which I'm not, and also that you be really good at faking enthusiasm for things that are objectively bad, which I'm even worse at. And so what ended up happening, though, was that in my job as a publicist, I was spending a lot of time on the phone with journalists, and I realized that I didn't want to be doing what I was doing. I wanted to do what they were doing. I wanted to write. I wanted to write about culture, and I wanted to review books. I wanted to be immersed in that world. This was an unfortunate time for me to finally figure out what I really wanted to do because it was 2008 and the economy imploded. So what I ended up doing was scrambling together a sort of a mini freelance career, just doing any work that paid me. One of the things that I ended up doing was blogging for an MTV blog called Hollywood Crush. This was the young Hollywood gossip blog, and I would write about young Hollywood gossip. Who's Kristen Stewart dating? That kind of thing for $15 a post. And that was a few years of my life. Eventually, they decided to shutter that blog. But when they did, they took two people who were blogging for them over to MTV News as reporters. And I was one of them. So I got really, really lucky to have this opportunity. All of a sudden, out of nowhere, I was an entertainment journalist, and with all that entailed. So that's my MTV story. I had that job as a shift reporter, morning shift reporter for maybe 4 years, and then I lost it in a round of layoffs, as one does.
Well, it's interesting because that job sounds very glamorous and really fun, but I bet it was very difficult and a lot of hard work and a lot of juggling, and very difficult to be a reporter, especially when you're talking about people every day. So I admire that and respect that. I worked for Rolling Stone magazine for a couple of years, and I did the gossip column for Rolling Stone called Capital Chatter, about what all behind the scenes in politics in Washington, D.C. So we have a sort of a matching. Our careers are in conversation, as you say.
That's right.
Yeah, it was really fun, and a lot of storytelling experience in that, though. What do you think that your life as a reporter, was it informed your writing as a storyteller?
As a storyteller, I don't know, but it certainly has made it possible for me to write quickly. I've learned to be not precious about what I'm doing. I can't sit there as a journalist, and I do still do culture writing. I can't sit there massaging the same paragraph over and over for days at a time because I have a deadline. I have to just send it out the door. It has to be good enough, and that's great practice if you want to be a novelist, because it teaches you to just move the story along.
I've been a television reporter for 43 years. And I tell people that if I had said to my news director, can I be on the 6 o'clock news at like 10 after 6? Because I'm not really feeling it. How long would I have lasted? So some days you just think, whatever I write is going to be good enough. And tomorrow I'll just do it better. So I love hearing that story. Let's hear some more stories and more questions from all of you. And then we will give away a copy of the really fabulous You Must Remember This by Kat Rosenfield. Catherine Hollum is saying, love the cover. Did you have any input into the cover and title? And you can see, we talked a little bit about the title, but you can see the cover is ice. Is that right? Broken.
Yeah. Yeah, I had a Pinterest mood board of everything that I consider sort of inspirational with the book. We went back and forth a little bit. Like, did we want to have a fox on the cover? There's a fox in the book that plays a sort of maybe a symbolic role, but ultimately, because my first book, I think, had this motif of a burning leaf, and that was a very autumnal story. This one obviously takes place during the winter, and it certainly involves ice and thin ice. And I loved the shattered ice motif that they came up with. It really looks beautiful alongside my other book. Sorry, my cat this is Rasputin. He loves Zoom. And so they sent me this thing with the shattered ice, and the one thing that I had feedback on that I wanted a little bit more of was the oh so subtle blood spatter on the title. If you can barely see it there on the M, it's just a little bit bloody, just a little bit sinister.
I love it. That's great. And talk about thin ice. So many characters in this book, not just Miriam, but so many characters in this book are walking on thin ice. So yes, it's quite amazing. Sue Johnson Bishop, hey Sue, says, Kat, do you listen to music while you write? Is there a soundtrack for the book?
My own phone makes that same autocorrect error all the time. It thinks that my name is there. I did listen to some kind of like depressed, actually there's a playlist on Spotify that's called Depressing Classical, and I would listen to that to kind of get myself in a misty watercolored mood. But I cannot listen to music with lyrics and write at the same time. It's just not something that I'm able to do.
I can't either. My brain gets clogged with the singing along or something. My best writing with music moment, one of my only ones, we were at Tanglewood out in Lenox, Massachusetts, at a rehearsal for the Boston Symphony. And they were playing Prokofiev's Fifth Symphony, all very bellicose. And I was writing the big climax of my book, sitting at a picnic table outside on the lawn. And that was great. But usually I have silence too. I'm going to go for Depressing Classical on Spotify. That seems very perfect. Renee is asking, did you spend time in Maine while writing this book? And you said that you did. Have you gone to any bookshops in Maine to have people read this book? Have you heard from people in Maine?
Not yet. Well, actually, no. I heard from one man in Maine who said he read it and liked it, which I appreciated. I'm hoping, because I relied so heavily on the Bar Harbor's Historical Society archives to write this book, to really make sure that I was capturing what the island was like back in the 40s. I'm very much hoping, once they reopen for the season, because they are closed during the winter, to get in touch with them and maybe arrange, something there where the book takes place, which I think would just be really fun.
That brings tears to my eyes. That is such a good idea. And I know the people who live there would love to read and chat with you about You Must Remember This, which is a marvelous book. Look, you all, it says Old Money, Dark Secrets, Cold Blood. That is a great tagline. Wonderful. Let's give away a copy to one. Like your cat, Rasputin, is getting some love in the comments here. So have them look at it. So let's spin the and see who wins a copy of You Must Remember This. And the winner is, we should be singing along here, Lynn Hunman. That is so great. Lynn is a veteran viewer of Crime Time, and we are so thrilled. Lynn, you will absolutely love this book. So email me, and I will tell you how to get your own copy of You Must Remember This. And as I said, the rest of you, run in about 30 seconds and go get your very own copy of You Must Remember This. Then let us know how you like it. That's what we're here for. Kat, thank you so much for being here this afternoon. We've loved it.
Thanks so much for having me. It was a pleasure.
It's a pleasure on this end as well. Don't move, all of you. Stand by, because in about 20 minutes, we will be talking on our regular scheduled prime time to Michael Bennett. Have you read this, Kat, yet? Michael Bennett's Better the Blood, which takes place without, the cover doesn't really have my ring light on it. This is very glossy. Better the Blood by Michael Bennett takes place in New Zealand, a Hannah Westerman thriller. It is excellent and couldn't be more different from Kat's You Must Remember This. So come back in 15 minutes to hear Michael Bennett. And then if you have something else to do, I can't imagine what that would be. If you have something else to do, come back next Tuesday at 4 p.m. to hear Harriet Tice talk about It Ends at Midnight. I am reading this starting this evening, and I absolutely cannot wait. So whether I see you in 15 minutes or whether I see you next Tuesday, remember, it is always safe inside a book, and we will see you next time.